deep in the reeds. And I'm also deeply uncomfortable because it's hot as hell in my apartment right now, so I thought I would read about a place that's a little cooler, and that place is called the moon. So if you didn't know, as of me posting this on July 20th, this is the 54th anniversary of the moon landing. So on this day, 54 years ago, 3 guys got blasted the fuck into space, they saw the moon, and then they went, that's what happened. So to celebrate this anniversary, I thought I would take a look at this vintage issue of National Geographic that came out just a few months after the moon landing in 1969. This is actually not that hard to come by. If you go on eBay, you can find copies of it for a reasonable price. And it's also available as a PDF on the National Geographic website, so I'll be sure to link that below. So the magazine has like 5 long articles about the moon landing. It starts off with like a transcript of the landing itself and like what they did while they were there. It talks about the scientific engineering processes involved, and of course, being National Geographic, it also has all kinds of really cool pictures too. Reading this magazine kind of felt like opening an old time capsule in a lot of ways. It really helped contextualize where people were when this was going on, and just how big of an accomplishment it is, because today we often take the moon landing for granted. But reading this really makes you understand just how incredible the achievement is, even by today's standards. Every step of the process is sort of documented in photographs and diagrams to make the reader understand just how incredible the achievement was. And it also talked about how they weren't just going there for the journey itself. Like, once they were there, they had all this scientific work to do. They had to collect all of these samples. They set up seismic equipment. They set up a laser reflector that we still use today to determine the exact distance between the Earth and the moon and how they vary over time. The magazine also mentions how the people who came back from the moon had to be quarantined because we weren't sure if there was bacteria on the moon that could be like super harmful to us. And it also mentions that the rocks that were brought back were still being tested when this magazine came out, so you feel like you're still in the middle of a developing story when you read this. And another thing that I love that sort of makes me appreciate the moon landing is just how optimistic it made everybody about the future. At the same time, though, the people in this are so starry-eyed about where we'll be in just a few years that it's pretty comical. So the administrator of NASA comes on for a bit and he talks about all the things we'll accomplish in no time at all. So he says, "I believe that men will drive onward in the years ahead to Mars, the moons of Jupiter, and other new worlds in our vast solar system. Some of these destinations are attainable in this century, some even within the next 2 decades. If we give full rein to our growing space capabilities, we can rapidly establish a bridgehead in the heavens in the next dozen years. In the mid-70s, for example, we could begin to assemble in Earth orbit a permanently manned station. In the late 70s, we could establish a moon base that could be occupied for months or even years. And in the 80s, we could even send men to Mars." So yeah, a lot of that is laughable now. But on the other hand, we do have a fully occupied space station around the clock. It just took a little longer than he expected. But you can't help but get sort of carried away by his like boyish optimism and his spirit of adventure, and it really brought me back to how I felt as a kid learning about space. This magazine also is a great way of reminding yourself just how far we've come since the 60s and how much more we've learned about space. In here, it mentions that our solar system has 32 moons, which made me literally laugh out loud because now we know of at least 300 moons in our solar system, and 142 of them belong to Saturn alone. We can also see space in a way that people from the time couldn't have even imagined. Like, this is what a good photo of Jupiter looked like in the 70s. And now this is what good pictures of Jupiter look like from our time. That doesn't even begin to cover the stuff that we've seen outside of our solar system. In the 90s, we launched the Hubble telescope, and for the first time we were able to see things up close that are billions of light years away. And then in 2021, we launched an even more powerful telescope, which now orbits out past the moon, called the James Webb Telescope. Now, it's still in the very early stages of what it's supposed to be doing up there, but the few photos that we've gotten back from it have been absolutely breathtaking. We've seen stars being formed, we've seen galaxies colliding in a degree of detail that we've never seen before. And because it can see so far, we're able to see the early universe. But even all of that is a drop in the bucket. We still have so many things we don't understand. Reading stuff like this always gets me excited and makes me think of all the endless possibilities of what could be out there. But if I can just get my head out of the clouds and get back to the magazine, it also mentioned the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union. Now, obviously this takes the perspective that we made it to the moon first, America won! But that's only because we're arbitrarily using the moon as the finish line here. The Soviets accomplished a lot of benchmarks first. They sent up the first satellite, the first man into space, they built the first space station just a few years after the moon landing, and I learned from this magazine that they were on the moon at the same time as the Americans. So, okay, the probe was unmanned and it crashed into the moon, but I just find it so crazy that I never heard about this. So while Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were just kind of waddling around with their space rocks, the Soviets were crashing a probe into the dark side of the moon. And apparently it was the autopilot that did it. We can assume that that's the case, because the same thing almost happened to the guys on the Apollo mission. The autopilot was guiding them straight into a crater filled with all these sharp rocks, and Neil Armstrong had like a very limited amount of time to quickly override the autopilot and jet over top of the crater in order to land safely. All of this, as well as talking about the crashed probe from the Soviets, made me constantly aware of just how frickin' dangerous this was. There were so many things that could have gone wrong, and I couldn't help but wonder about what it would have been like if these astronauts had been stranded on the moon. Like, the whole world was watching, so I can't imagine the amount of, like, national trauma that would cause to have the whole world aware that there are people on the moon who are dying and beyond any help, you know what I mean? So I wonder if there's some alternate history novel that's been written about that. It also made me think, like, this Soviet-American stuff made me think of just how more international space exploration is than it was back in the day. Like, we've been able to make all these huge accomplishments because we decided not to constantly compete and gamify the space race and make it about international collaboration. That's why we have the International Space Station and stuff like that. The other thing that this magazine came with, which I unfortunately don't have anymore, was a vinyl record on flexi-disc which had like the sounds of the space age on it. And unfortunately the only thing I have left of it is like a tiny scrap of vinyl that's still like stuck between the pages. But you can go on YouTube and look it up and listen to it for yourself, so it's pretty interesting. But what I do have is this poster, which was printed in an issue of National Geographic that came out 4 years later. And it shows all the people who participated in Apollo space missions, including the Apollo 13 mission, which ended up being the last people who went to the moon. And then on the other side, it's a picture of the little blue planet that we all know and love. So yeah, I feel pretty cool to have all this vintage space age stuff. The last thing I need to mention about this is just how little some things have changed, because it seems like every corporation that has an advertisement in here wants to cash in on the moon landing craze. And now there's a few in here where it makes sense, like Hasselblad cameras or Boeing jets, who actually contributed equipment to the moon landing mission. But then in the back there's just this jewelry advertisement that I have to read to you. It says, "Moon rocks? Not yet! We must admit that the beautiful metallic stones in Sarah Coventry's striking new Tranquility necklace and earrings did not come from the moon, but it may be only a matter of time, because Sarah will go to any extreme to bring exclusive jewelry to fashion-conscious women everywhere, even to the moon." Now, Did Sarah Coventry go to the moon to get jewelry? No. At the end of the day, this magazine didn't quite cover everything that I was hoping it would, but I think that's just a testament to how this kind of thing always leaves me craving more. For the amount of space that they had for this, they packed in a ton of information, gave a ton of context, and really made you appreciate the magnitude of the accomplishment. I really enjoyed reading about this, and I highly recommend you check out the PDF below because I think you'll have a lot of fun reading it too. But I guess that'll have to do it for my long-winded discussion about this out-of-date magazine. I hope somebody out there enjoyed it. And if you know of any good nonfiction books about the space race or the moon landing, then please tell me, because I'm very much in a spacey science fiction kind of mood right now, so yeah, let me know. Happy reading and happy moon landing anniversary. I am going to leave now because I'm drenched in sweat. Goodbye.